TeslaTech Extraordinary Technology Conference, Vern Warwick. He's from Edmonton, where I've been once, beautiful place, and he is a court-recognized expert on the financial system. He trained as an engineer, which was a background that allowed him to spot problems and tweak and poke and prod and fix things. And he realized, well, there are plenty of problems with equipment, but 95% of the problems in the world have to do with the money system. And so he switched careers and started working in that way. And he gave me a quote from Henry Ford, who said, "The man who can solve the monetary system will do more than all the generals in history." Let's welcome Vern Warwick.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Point it anywhere?
Yeah, use your left button. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, hold on. Hold on. Let me activate it here.
Okay.
Okay, set.
How many in the audience have seen and analyzed the Zapruder film? Not many.
Try to.
How many in the audience? Is this working right now? I speak fairly loudly anyway, but that sounds like it's on now. How many people in the audience have seen the Zapruder film and taken a close look at it? We got a few. There are a couple of books out that actually name who is shown on that film as at least one of the shooters in the November 22, 1963 Kennedy assassination. It shows right up on the film. What I found amazing after having taken a look at that is that other people that I know who have also seen the film could still go along with the official version as put out either by the media or the Warren Commission report. You may say, what has this got to do with the money system? And you have to say that a definition that I like is that two or more people working covertly in concert for a nefarious result is the definition of conspiracy, and yet we're not allowed to use that word anymore because you're a kook if you use that word. But anybody who can take a look at the Zapruder film and still at the same time believe that there was no conspiracy. Dr. Stephen Greer said something, he liked one of the definitions of insanity, and he named one of them. The other definition I like is to hold at the same time that that two mutually exclusive propositions can be held to be true at the same time. And we see that with the Zapruder film. If we have the no interest, we don't need taxes, and I'm going to prove that in the presentation. So why didn't we think of this before? Now, when John F. Kennedy was taken out, there are many people who have taken a look at what happened behind that and realized that JFK was well aware of what the Federal Reserve System was doing to the United States. And he had made a vow that he was going to do something about it. I can give you this later. It's a little bit of a complicated website, but it is john-f-kennedy.net, thefederalreserve.htm. Anybody who wants that, I should have had it up on a slide here, but I apologize for not having done so, but I'll give that to you later. And on this, there's a very interesting report put together by Anthony Wayne, and it involves JFK's efforts to turn around the power of the Federal Reserve. And I'm just going to read a few excerpts from that because I think it's very pertinent to where we are today, and as Dr. Stephen Greer said, it will also be pointing the way to another area that we really need to address, not just the energy system and all of the technology that we talk about here at the conference, but without a major reform in the monetary system, we are going to be just as stymied, in my opinion. On June 4th, 1963, a virtually unknown presidential decree, Executive Order 11110, was passed and signed with the authority to basically strip the Federal Reserve Bank of the power to loan money to the United States federal government at interest. With the stroke of a pen, President Kennedy declared that the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank would soon be out of business. The Christian Law Federation has exhaustively researched the matter through the Federal Register and Library of Congress. They now safely conclude that this executive order has never been repealed, amended, or superseded by any subsequent executive order. In simple terms, it is still valid. When President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the author of Profiles in Courage, signed this order, it returned to the federal government, specifically the Treasury Department, the constitutional power to create and issue currency money without going through the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank. President Kennedy's Executive Order 11110 gave the Treasury Department the explicit authority to issue silver certificates against any silver bullion, silver, or standard silver dollars in the Treasury. It appears obvious that President Kennedy knew the Federal Reserve notes being used as the purported legal currency were contrary to the Constitution of the United States of America. President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, and the United States notes he had issued were immediately taken out of circulation. Now, Executive Order 11110 should have prevented the national debt from reaching its current level. Virtually all of the nearly $9 trillion in federal debt. Now, that's what this publication says. It is, of course, beyond that, and even this changes by the hour. It's been created since '63. If LBJ or any subsequent president were to enforce it, it would have almost immediately given the U.S. government the ability to repay its debt without going to the private Federal Reserve banks and being charged interest to create new money. This executive order gave the USA the ability to once again create its own money backed by silver and and realm value worth something. Again, according to the research of the Christian Law Federation, just 5 months after Kennedy was assassinated, no more of the Series 1958 silver certificates were issued either, and they were subsequently removed from circulation. Perhaps the assassination of JFK was a warning to all future presidents not to interfere with the private Federal Reserve's control over the creation of money. It seems very apparent that President Kennedy challenged the powers that exist behind the U.S. and world finance. Excuse me. With true patriotic courage, JFK boldly faced the two most successful vehicles that have ever been used to drive up debt. One, war, and two, the creation of money by a privately owned central bank. His efforts to have all U.S. troops out of Vietnam by 1965 continued with Executive Order 11110 would have destroyed the profits and control of the private reserve bank. There are many more things that can be said that I could read out on that, but we need to know, are there other people that have picked up on this? JFK seemed to have picked up on it. There were 4 presidents, in my opinion and in my research, that died because they came across this very important aspect of our civilization. In reading the book Best Evidence by David Lifton, he names, as I said, one of the people who for sure was involved in the shooting. Then, of course, there was William Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse. He also names the individual. And when you take a look at the Zapruder film, it's very evident what did take place. I say 3 out of the 4 because after reading Michael Collins Piper's book, which was called Final Judgment, I'm of the conclusion that it was only one of several reasons why JFK was assassinated. But since we're here to talk about the money system, I'm going to focus on that aspect of it. As I said, there were, I'm going to go ahead to the next one in here. This is what we're going to be talking about, but I do want to show some other people that have actually picked up on all that. This is a famous quotation that is in almost all the literature that you will come across on those who control the money system. He was a mentor to Bill Clinton, author of Tragedy and Hope. So what really is the problem that Kennedy and other very high-profile figures were trying to solve? Washington State Senator Jack Metcalf, many, many years ago, came up with what he called the federal saloon. And it was something that really allowed all the tumblers to come into place for me. 4 cowboys walk into a bar and they walk up to the bartender and they say, "Bartender, we've been on the road for 2 weeks. We're dirty, we're hot, we're thirsty. We'd like to have a few beers on the counter right now, and then we'd like to borrow a deck of cards." Well, the bartender reached back into his fridge and he pulled out 8 cold and frosty beers and he put them on the counter, and one of the cowboys paid for the beer. And then he said, "And now I'd like to borrow a deck of cards." And the bartender looked at him and said, "I've never seen you before in my life. If I lend you a deck of cards, how do I know I'm going to get the cards back?" And the cowboy said, "Hey, we're going to give you lots of business. We're going to buy some steak sandwiches off you. We're going to buy lots of beer and just really have ourselves a good time if you just lend us a deck of cards." And he said, "Well," he said, "I do appreciate your business, but," he says, "I just have no guarantee I'm going to get my cards back at the end of the night." And so the cowboy said, "I'll tell you what," and he reaches down and he picks up his $2,000 saddle and he puts it up on the bar. And he says, "If you don't get that 25-cent deck of cards back at the end of the night, you get to keep my $2,000 saddle." And the bartender said, "Well, I appreciate your show of good faith," but he says, "How do I know one of your buddies isn't going to walk off with my deck of cards?" So the cowboy says, "Mo, Frank, Larry, get over here, bring your saddles." So to make a long story short, all 4 saddles end up on the bar. And the bartender looks at him and reaches under the counter and he says, "Boys, you go have a good game now." He puts a deck of cards up on the counter. And one of the cowboys reaches for the deck of cards, and at the last second, the bartender grabs his hand and he says, "By the way, at the end of the night, I want 56 cards back." And that's the system we have right now. Essentially, 52 cards are put into circulation and they demand 56 back. And the other 4 cards are never created. All of a sudden, several tumblers, as I said, fell into place when Jack Metcalf told that to me about 25 or 30 years ago. Well, these cowboys are not stupid. They were sitting there and they're saying, "Wait a second, maybe I can return 14 cards at the end of the night. And maybe my buddy here can return 14 cards. And maybe my opponent over here can return 14 cards. But for damn sure, this guy can't. And if he can't, it's quite possible in any one business cycle, if you will, for 3 out of the 4 people not to be able to return their share. I could end up with all 39 cards, and not one of these guys would be able to have 14 cards to repay. So we end up having these booms and busts that are artificially put upon us because of the system of putting 52 into circulation and demanding 56 back, to use the analogy. So they're sitting there and saying, "We can't do it amongst what we have. Maybe we can go to the table next to us. Maybe we can suck them into getting some of their cards so that we can repay our portion of this, what we owe the bartender." And so now we end up with competition, and we end up with strife between countries because of this artificial system. John Kenneth Galbraith once said, "The method by which banks create money and introduce it into society is so simple that it repels the mind." And that was my problem in the beginning too. When I first came across what I call the money trick, or what other people have called the money trick, I said, it can't be that. It's so simple, I just can't believe that it could possibly be that way. Again, there are other people, very high profile. And although I'm from Canada, there are many quotations from United States presidents and other people of very high profile that have picked up on this system. If I'm going too fast on this, please let me know. I really think you folks need to know what some of these people have picked up on. Okay. I guess while this is happening, I should be saying something because DVDs and VHS hate dead airspace. But I do want people to know that there aren't just kooks like me that are coming out and making statements about the money system and how important it is to make the necessary changes so that we can eliminate a lot of the problems that Dr. Stephen Greer was talking about. I think he used the term 50% of the world's population. I really think it's closer to 90% of the world's population is impoverished and enslaved because of this system. You can actually Google these quotations to get that. It's also in my book, which is in the hardcover, the hard form or the CD that we have here. Either way, you can get that information. So how do the banks create society's money and introduce it into circulation? Essentially, we have a certain amount of money that comes into society, and I want to differentiate between what we do in circulating money within society as opposed to what we do to get the money into society in the first place and have it come back out. Because the transactions that we all do every single day in the buying of fruit and vegetables and shoes and televisions and going to seminars like this, as we trade, that's all within society. But how does money come into society? In Canada, and I apologize for this, but essentially it's the same all around the world. I have used the Canadian aspect of it. Right now, the only conduit through which money enters Canadian society, or in your case, the US society, comes in through the banking system. And in Canada, the Bank of Canada produces only 2% of that, and it's all in the form of loans, so-called loans. And 98% is done by the chartered banks, what you folks here in the United States would call the commercial banks. So who authorizes these groups to create this money and then introduce it into society? Effectively, any one of these three entities: government, business, and individuals, authorize the banking system to put a certain amount of money into circulation, all in the form of loans. And as the question says, can they authorize the banks to introduce any amount of money? And of course, they cannot. They can only put in the amount that is collateralized. As you will see by the end of the presentation, I hope, there are a lot of people who come to me and say, the main problem is that we have fiat money. Canada, the United States, Britain, the Commonwealth. It isn't true. Fiat money, by definition, is unbacked legal tender. Ladies and gentlemen, the money that is in circulation in your country and my country and the other countries I mentioned is more backed than anything else you will ever see. It is backed by the hard assets of the people. In the case of individuals, they back it by going in and getting loans that are backed by home, their automobile insurance policies, what you would call, I believe it's RIAs. We call them RRSPs, same thing. And of course, the income. That's what the individuals back it or collateralize the issue of money. What do businesses do? Businesses collateralize it with existing corporate assets and equity and personal guarantees, which of course go back to what do you have as individuals. Does anybody know what government does to collateralize their loans? Tax. You got it. Surprise, taxation. So their ability to tax the people and businesses is their way of collateralizing whatever loans they come up with, whether they be debentures, T-bills, some form of securities that they put up to collateralize the loans that they go and receive from the banking system, including the Federal Reserve. Of course, this doesn't represent the flow of money into and out of society, because now we recognize that for every so-called loan that is made, there must be a repayment. Does that represent? Now, this is under the present system. What we're seeing here is the present system. And of course, that doesn't represent everything to make up the flow chart, because we have X dollars going into society, and we have X dollars in repayments, and we have Y dollars in interest, just like the cowboys had to repay the 4 extra cards that were necessary to fulfill the contractual obligation with the 52 that were put into circulation. And as I say here, if there's only X dollars in circulation, how can we repay X plus Y? Same problem the cowboys faced. Does this represent the whole flow chart? Well, it doesn't, but just to show you the kind of figures that we need to deal with when we're talking about compound interest. We've all heard about the magic of compound interest. As a matter of fact, I think it was Einstein that once said that it was the 8th wonder of the world. Well, it's magic, all right, but it's black magic. And as we see here, in Canada, in 1913, coincidentally the same year that the Federal Reserve Act was passed, in Canada, the 1913 Bank Act did the same thing to Canada that the Federal Reserve Act did to the United States. And this was the debt that we had in billions of dollars. And up until 1913, in Canada, for the 46 years from 1867, from the B&A Act to 1913, we built a system of roads and railroads and a complete infrastructure across the nation, and put together a military, put together a postal service, and did all the things that were necessary to get the country going, and only accumulated a debt of $0.314 billion. And then when the Bank Act came in, we quadrupled that debt in the next 4 years, and that necessitated the Income War Tax Act, because they somehow had to pay back that which they had borrowed into circulation at interest. And now in Canada we call this the hockey stick. This looks like the hockey stick. The debt is now asymptoting to infinity. It's going up so hard and so fast, just like you folks are seeing right now in the United States. The total debt in Canada, I'm going to round it off here because as I said earlier, it's changing by the hour. But when you take a look at the 6 different levels that you need to talk about and you need to consider, that's the federal, the provincial, the regional, the municipal, and the corporate and the personal debt in Canada is approximately $6 trillion. You know how much money there is in the Canadian money supply? You take all the money out of my pocket, everything that's in your bank account, everything that's in IBM's bank account, and you add it all up together, and all of the Canadian currency held by every other country in the world, and it adds up to approximately $800 billion. How do you pay a $6 trillion debt with $800 billion in the money supply? It can't be done, and it was never intended to be done. In the United States, depending on whose figures you use, your debt with the same 6 different levels with slightly different labels attached to them is somewhere between $42 to $44 trillion with only $9 trillion in the money supply. How do you repay a $42 trillion debt with $9 trillion in the money supply? And again, it's changing at the rate of $100 million an hour. You can't keep up with it. So please don't hold me to the exact figures, but you get the idea that we have a serious problem here when you're talking about money that is issued as an interest-bearing debt. So, as I said earlier, is this the only representation? And actually, we have X dollars coming into circulation. We have X dollars in repayments. We have Y in interest. And we have Z ostensibly for taxation to go to the government, but that indeed is a myth. The money ostensibly goes to the government, but in reality, it goes back up to the banking system. Because all of the taxes collected in Canada and the US right now do not even pay the interest on the debt. All of the taxes do not even pay the interest on the debt that has accumulated due to the banking system. So, as I say here, if there's only X dollars in circulation, because that's all that comes in, how can you repay X plus Y plus Z, or Z, as you folks say it? At this point, I think we need to define money. Because amazingly as it sounds, although we work with it every single day, it's like somebody else at the conference said, you know, the fish at the bottom of the pond or the bottom of the ocean doesn't realize that he's really swimming in water. We use money every single day and we take it for granted that we know what it is. But do we really? I think that we need to take a closer look at it. By definition, barter is always a completed trade. And that means that I trade goods and or services to you for services and or goods. And when you and I are happy with that trade, the trade is done, it's completed. That's what barter is by definition. So in this particular case, if I'm a member of a community that has been doing nothing but barter for years, and one day I come to my next door neighbor Steve here and say, Steve, you and I have agreed that 10 pounds of my potatoes are worth 2 of your chickens. Can we make a trade today? And Steve says, Vern, you're right, we did agree that 2 of my chickens were worth 10 pounds of your potatoes, but I just don't need any potatoes today. And so I say, Steve, I got an idea. Since you don't need the potatoes, how be I write you an IOU for 10 pounds of potatoes? And I come up and I give the IOU to Steve. And Steve says, Vern, I will accept this IOU because I believe in your ability and your integrity to redeem this IOU upon demand. Otherwise, if either one of those criteria are missing, Steve would not accept my IOU. So he does accept my IOU, and he gives me the chickens. So what do we have here? That, by the way, is sorry, John. Just need to go back one more.
That's all right.
Thank you. That one right there is what I have just given, so that everybody can see it, what I have just given Steve in payment for the chickens that I received from him. Acceptance of the IOU always signifies a deferred trade, as opposed to barter. Barter always involves a completed trade. Two people walk away having been very happy with the trade that has just taken place. But it is a completed trade. When you involve IOUs or money, it always signifies a deferred trade. That means in this particular case with Steve, I got what I wanted. I walked away with 2 chickens. But Steve still doesn't have what he wants. He only has a claim to something that he may want in the future. So it's a deferred trade. I got what I want, he still doesn't have what he wants. But the next day, he decides he wants to have a dinner party. And he goes to his neighbor and says, Gene, I want to hold a dinner party and I need some asparagus. You and I have agreed that 2 of my chickens are worth 10 pounds of your asparagus. Can we make a trade? And she says, Steve, I just don't need any chickens today. And Steve says, wait a second, I got this IOU for 10 pounds of potatoes from Vern Warwick. Will you accept it? And so he hands it on to Gene, sorry. and Gene says, I know Vern, and I believe in his ability and his integrity to redeem this IOU upon demand. So yes, you can have my asparagus. Now, to make a really long story short, this can travel throughout the whole community, effecting deferred trade after deferred trade. As you can see, the goods move in one direction and the IOU moves in the other direction, until it finally comes back to the last gentleman that you can see there. And he comes to me and he says, Vern, I got this IOU for 10 pounds of potatoes. Will you redeem it for me? And I take the IOU and I give him 10 pounds of potatoes. And what do I do with the IOU? I rip it up. It served its purpose. The only difference between this analogy and the reality is that we have delegated the function of creating the IOUs of the community to an entity what we used to think was the government. Let's just bear with me for now on this. In thinking that it's the government. As you all know, it's the Federal Reserve in the United States and it's the chartered banks in Canada. But we delegate that function because we want to guarantee universality of redeemability. You don't need to know Vern Warwick in Salt Lake City who comes from Edmonton to be able to redeem the IOU. You're all accepting IOUs that are backed by everybody in the entire country, not just the community. So we have, money is a wonderful tool, but just like any other tool, any tool in history can all be used either for good or for bad. A hammer can be used to build a house, but it can also be used to hit somebody over the head. Every tool we know, television, has been co-opted and used against us. The money system is the same thing. Money is one of the most wonderful inventions that have ever come about in the history of man. But when you put it in the wrong hands, when you put it into hands that are going to use it against us, this tool has been working to enslave people instead of freeing them up, which you will see as we go further into this. So that is essentially is what money is. Money is an IOU. Many people call it a medium of exchange. They talk about other definitions for it, but ultimately money is an IOU. And what backs the IOU? always the ability and the integrity of the issuer to redeem it upon demand. That's what backs money. So the money in the United States should be backed, and the money that is in circulation is backed by the people, because all of the money you will see that is in circulation is backed by the collateralization that allowed that money to come into circulation in the first place. The interest part of it is not backed. In other words, the $9 trillion that is in circulation in the United States right now is backed by your homes, your cars, your RIAs, RRSPs, insurance policies. It's backed. But the 42 minus 9 is not backed because it was never created. But that part is used to seize the real assets of the people. The impossible repayment of the debt is what's used to seize the real assets of the people. So at any one point in this entire cycle, if any one of the people who had taken that IOU, any one of these people, if they had come to me and tried to redeem the IOU and I either couldn't or wouldn't, who would be the loser? The last guy, the person holding the note, is the loser. Now, I would lose something in reputation, but from a physical reality point of view, a material asset point of view, the last holder of the note would be the loser. Now, nobody borrows money to put it under their pillow. No sane, intelligent person borrows money to put it under their pillow. So if when you go to the bank to get a so-called loan, and it isn't a loan, as you can see, if it's collateralized, it's not a loan, it's a monetization of a real asset. And that means that you're temporarily extracting the financial credit from a real asset. You need to differentiate in your mind the difference between real assets and financial assets. Real assets are those which provide us with immediate utility. The computers that we see here, the clothing we're all wearing, the seats you're sitting in, the food are all real assets. Money and the debt instruments that are associated with money are only claims to real assets. They do not represent real assets. And with that in mind, if you go to a bank to borrow money and this money gets put into circulation, nobody borrows it to put it under their pillow. So it immediately goes out into the community and it's being held by the community. And that money that is in the hands of the community is actually backed by the worthy assets of the alleged borrower. Now, banks tell a monstrous lie to get away with what they're doing. They tell you that they're lending depositors money. It's never happened in the history of banking, and if it did, it would be illegal. Banks cannot lend out liabilities. It's not legal. And the other way that I can show you this is that from a micro point of view, I've asked people in seminars that I've done around the world on this, I've asked, has anybody in this audience ever taken a look at their bank book and seen the bank book with an entry that says money loaned to Joe Blow through the banking system? And of course, nobody ever has that entered into their bank book. You know, Joe Blow goes and borrows money from the bank, and because you're a depositor, they have to make a double entry bookkeeping. They have to make an entry to show that under a double entry bookkeeping system, they have to do that to keep the book straight, and it's never happened. The other point of view is, as you take a look at the expanding money supply, they can't possibly be having it just come from the lending of depositors' money, because it just keeps going up. So when they tell you that, they're telling you that for a very specific reason. And the reason is so that they can charge you interest on the money that they are allegedly lending you. There's three factors to consider in the entire banking process. Number one, banks create money out of nothing. I think probably everybody here in this room knows that. They create the money from nothing, just like I created this IOU from nothing other than ink and paper. Now that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It has value in my ability and my integrity to back it. But banks still do create money from nothing. The second thing is they claim ownership of that which they created from nothing. And the third thing is that they never create the interest that is necessary for the alleged borrower to fulfill the contract. It's never created. So it's like a game of musical chairs. In the entire country, say $100 billion is put into circulation, but the banks demand back $110 billion. Now somebody's got to lose, because the only thing that's in circulation is P, but they demand back P plus I. So in any one business cycle, you got 11 people trying to sit down in 10 chairs. Somebody's got to lose out. And so they tell you, oh, your business failed? Oh, must have been bad management. And in some cases it is. But with a system that's rigged, like what we just saw in the previous slides, somebody has to fail in every single business cycle. And the higher the interest rates, the faster and deeper are the defaults that take place. So again, I mentioned there are three facets to the banking. They create the money from nothing, they claim ownership of that which they created from nothing, and they never create the interest. Now when I hear people talking to me, they come up to me afterwards, or they come to me before a session and they say, the big problem is that they create money from nothing. That isn't a problem. It's the only one of those three aspects that isn't a problem, because it's a contract. The problem is steps 2 and 3. They claim ownership of that which doesn't belong to them, and they never create the interest. They're able to say that they lend depositors money so that they can get away with charging you interest and making you think that they have to pay interest to the depositors for that reason. So if banks don't lend depositors money, what is the source of the funds? Does anybody know what the source of the funds is if they're not lending depositors money? What's that? Okay, now the printing press actually puts only approximately it depends on which country you're in, 0.1% of the money. Most people do think of those notes that they carry in their pocket as being the money, but of course that only represents a very small percentage. I'm sorry?
Just a notation on a ledger.
Yeah. Exactly. And the stuff that you actually know that goes through the printing press is a very, very small portion of that. So the source of the funds, as we all saw, all the money comes in as an interest-bearing debt. But what is the source of the funds? It's the promissory note. Promissory note has, amongst many other features, it has two main factors that are involved with it. The promissory note gets from me, the alleged borrower, the promise to repay in a timely fashion, and the second thing is that it promises to put up collateral should I fail to repay in a timely fashion. So it's the promissory note of the alleged borrower that is the source of the funds. And that's something I know that is going to be tough for, as John Kenneth Galbraith said, the method by which they do this is so simple it repels the mind. What banks should be is a glorified bookkeeping corporation, a glorified bookkeeping agency. When you go in and they keep track of the myriad transactions that take place every single day. For that, I'm willing to pay them a transaction fee on every single one of my checks and deposits. But not to pay them $250,000 on a $100,000 house. And that's what we all end up doing. You would think that things were absolutely crazy if a carpenter came to you after he built the house and he said, I know I got $50,000 for doing my portion of this house, but I want another $50,000 now, and next year I want another $50,000. You'd think he was a criminal. And yet the people who have had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the building of your house take 3 times the total value of that house in the beginning. It's a crime, it's a swindle that beggars description, but I'm trying to. In Canada, as I point out in my book, and one of the fellows that I have done work with on the money system actually wrote the 3rd chapter of my book. He points out that there are 19 Canadian criminal code offenses committed every time a bank enters into a so-called loan agreement. 19 criminal code offenses. Now this couldn't be done without the collusion of the lawyers and the courts. It couldn't possibly be done. And there are instances here in the United States where judges have found out about this and picked up on it and tried to do something about it with the same results that Mr. Kennedy came about. Now, how could we not know? How could we as a people, and the majority of the people in Canada and the United States, not know about all of this? Why do you have to come and hear somebody like me tell you this when it's not being brought to your attention by the media? And I can't think of any better way of describing how we did not know this than to read you the quotation that came from a 1953 retirement party, and this was the former chief of staff of the New York Times when he was at his retirement party, and the people came to him to toast him and his profession. And he said this: "There is no such thing at this date of the world's history in America as an independent press. You know it, and I know it. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinion out of the paper I am connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things, and any one of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the street looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper, before 24 hours, my occupation would be gone. The business of journalism is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it, and I know it, and what folly is this, toasting an independent press? We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks, they pull the strings, and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes." I can't think of anything that puts it more concisely than that. This coming from the former chief of staff of the New York Times. Granted, it's 50 years ago, but it's as appropriate today as it was then. I was on a camping trip a few years ago, and this was in British Columbia. We were having some pretty horrible fires at the time I went on this camping trip. And there were about 6 of us. And we were staying in a tent and having a good time, and we got up one morning, and lo and behold, there was a fire about 50 feet from our tent. And so we got some water, and we went out, and we went and doused the flames and got it out. And before we'd even finished putting that one out, we saw 3 more fires over there and 2 more over here. So we're just scrambling around, trying to get these fires put out. And by the time we were just so exhausted, there's another 10 fires going. Well, I decided to take a bit of a break, and I went off a little bit, and about 100 yards away from the camp. And lo and behold, I look inside the forest, and here's a guy with a flamethrower. And ladies and gentlemen, this system that we see here, all of the little fires that we're taking a look at, we have a lot of problems. As Dr. Greer said, he was a tough act to follow, wasn't he, eh? He was a tremendous presentation. But he pointed out a lot of problems, and we do have a lot of problems. And all these little fires that we see around us are problems that we need to deal with. But until we can get at the guy with the flamethrower, all of these problems are not going to go away, because the flamethrower is feeding what we see out there in our society. We got to get the guy with the flamethrower. So how do we stop this? How do we solve this problem? As we can see, we have been blessed with an inordinate amount of goods and goodwill amongst the people to help each other. We have an abundance. And we should be able to come up with a solution here. Now, some people disagree with my advocating that the government should be involved, and I am totally open. Because, folks, we are now going under the solution part of this, because I've described the problem, and now we're going to get into the solution. But some people rail against government being involved, and I don't disagree. But I am open to suggestions about how we do it in a way that doesn't involve the natural greed that we can have if we are left totally independent with no responsibility and no accountability to others around us. I'm totally open to that. But as part of the solution, we have to recognize that there's a certain amount of money that still has to come into society in the form of loans. Real loans, not ephemeral, not transient, not illusory loans like we saw in the problem part of this. So a certain amount of money still has to come in. And how are we going to do this? It's only going to come through business and individuals. As you notice, governments would not be allowed to borrow. That's part of the problem that we have right now. So again, the authorization to put it in through the bank would come from business and individuals. And the same kind of collateralization would take place. And there is no need for the private issue of money at profit. Because, of course, it isn't profit. Profit, by definition, is ROIC, or return on invested capital, and the banks do not have anything invested. So it's not profit, it's infinite, it's X over 0. So, of course, we have the same situation where we have X amount of dollars coming into circulation, and we have X dollars coming back in repayments. This is a fact of human history, that as time goes on, we need less and less labor as a component of the final productivity that we can put forth as a nation. As time goes on, the percentage of labor goes down. Some could even make the case that it asymptotes to 0. Obviously, it can't be completely 0, but it keeps on asymptoting to 0. How do we, keeping in mind that we have to allow what is physical, whatever reality is, has got to be reflected properly in the financial system. If the financial system does not properly reflect reality, then it is a deficient system. We have to have systems serve us instead of us serving systems. So if this is a reality, how do we pay for the fact that we need less and less labor per unit output than we did, say, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? How do we reflect that? We have to be able to put purchasing power into the hands of the people that have been displaced by machines and increasing productivity. So we have to have some form that is outside of purely loans. I mean, let's just face it, if machines did, if it actually did get to the point where our individual human input was 0%, how would we reflect that? If we have to go work for every single dollar we make, and we can't work anymore because of the machines are doing it all, how would we distribute the purchasing power? Well, you have to be able to distribute purchasing power, at least in a pro rata basis, until we can get to that point. We're never going to get there, but as long as the labor keeps on going, labor input by human beings keeps on going down and down and down, we have to be able to reflect that and put purchasing power into the hands of the people so they can buy the productivity that is being put out by the machines. Because machines do not buy things. People buy things. We have to put the purchasing power into the hands of the people. So, as you can see, there is a flow of money into society where we have, which I just call A dollars in dividends, which can be calculated according to the productivity of the nation per capita. It's funny that when you put this forward to some people, they say they can see that a fellow who was born into a millionaire's family and he inherited all these shares in corporations, and there's no problem with that guy getting dividends from a company that increases its productivity. But they rail against the thought that when a country increases its productivity, we can't allow the shares to be given to the people who helped put that country into that position. That to me is a little bit of a mystery. Again, I apologize for the fact that most of these slides do have reference to Canada, but again, the principle is the same. Because government should not be in a position where it ever needs to borrow money, and I'm going to get to that aspect of it here in a second. And that's a good question. Because we do need to have government having a flow of money. And I'll get to that. If I haven't answered your question by the time the slide comes up, please let me know. Now, I should actually go to the next one first and then have John come back and because there it is. That'll answer the question. There has to be a flow of money into society that allows government to perform the functions that we constitutionally allow them to have, rather than the functions they have usurped at this point in our history. Probably I can mostly speak for Canada more than the US, but 95% of the functions that are now being performed by government would be, they're unconstitutional to begin with. Secondarily, they would be much better provided and put into service by the private people. But it's the way the situation is right now. Whatever government functions we do agree on as a people, then we would allow them to have a stream of funding that would take care of that. And I recommend, there are people that are microeconomists. I look at myself more as a macro, taking a look at the overall structure. And there are people who deal in the micro aspects of it on a daily basis. They could more accurately tell me what exactly that should be relative to what this is. And I think it should be about 10%. In other words, whatever is decided as the dividends coming into society should be, then the government flow should be about 10% of those dividends. And they should be held to that. They should be held accountable to that. One of the reasons that I wanted to go ahead was to say, if you eliminate this just for a second now, eliminate this one just for a second because I'm going to talk about that. We have the same problem on the other side that we had before. Remember when I said that x cannot equal x plus y plus z unless, of course, y and z are 0. But they're not. As we know in our society right now, y and z are not 0. So how can you have a system when x equals x plus y plus z? You can't have it. But now we have it in the other way. Now we have x plus a plus g trying to equal x, and it can't be done. So we have to have something that comes into play to take care of that. As an engineer, I was trained that one of the things that we take a look at is that approximately every 50 years, if you were to do absolutely nothing to the infrastructure of your country, your house, your roads, your bridges, big buildings, small buildings, if you did absolutely nothing, no maintenance whatsoever, that building would be uninhabitable, if not crumble to the ground in 50 years. So essentially then, we're looking, again, that the financial system must be a direct reflection of reality. So if in reality we can see that houses start to crumble, the roads start to crumble, we can say that in 50 years, if they go to nothing, then it's approximately a 2% per year of diminution, depreciation, real depreciation, as opposed to financial depreciation. And so what I have recommended is that instead of taxation, since you need to get that an excess of money out of circulation, since we have money coming in as A plus G plus X coming into money and only X coming back out, we need to have something that takes care of this other function. And that's why I put in the depreciation adjustment. So if the depreciation adjustment is 2%, how would we put that into practice? And the recommendation that I have, that I put forward in this regard, is to depreciate the currency that is in circulation by 2% a year. And that means that every bank account that's in the country that's held by everybody, if you've got $10,000 in your bank account right now, that you would end up with 2% less, so you'd have $9,800. And the currency itself that is going to be issued in, let's say, 2008 as opposed to 2007 would be worth 100%, and the 2007 bill would only be worth 98%. Now, I've had people say to me, but why would I want to be involved with a currency that depreciated by 2%? Well, ladies and gentlemen, 80% of the cost of everything you will see in your lives, it doesn't matter what you look at, 80% is made up of interest and taxes right now. And I'm saying get rid of the interest on the creation of money and get rid of the taxation. Now, instead of your house costing you $100,000, it's going to cost you $20,000. Because now you're going to be paying the people that actually built your home rather than paying the bloodsuckers who have imposed these extra costs and having done nothing for it. So you're railing against the 2%, but you're ready to accept the 80%, and it doesn't make sense to me. But I want you to sort of think about the B, depreciation adjustment, as being the solution to this, which would be then distributed over all of society to the rate of 2%, as opposed to the 80% that is taken in now by the people who are in control of the monetary system. This is a second solution. That is what I call the mathematical solution that can be implemented into any nation in the world from a national point of view. The second solution, and it can be taking place at the very same time or previous to what we just talked about. How many here are familiar with the community currency movement? Effectively, not as many as I would have thought, but effectively, a community currency, an example would be the Ithaca Hour of Ithaca, New York. The Toronto dollar, we can get them up here. Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. Beautiful currency with counterfeit features built into it. Now, this currency is backed, just like this currency was backed. This IOU was backed by the ability and the integrity of the issuer to redeem it upon demand. Keep this in mind when you're thinking about the circulation of money. Money out of the hands of the issuer is a debt to the issuer. Money in the hands of a receiver is a credit. I've had people who have said to me, you know, this stuff here, it's worthless. This stuff, they say, it's worthless. And they'll hold this up, and whether it's an American 20 or a Canadian 20, and they will say, it has no value. And I'll say, I can disprove that to you right now in 5 seconds. I say, give it to me if you don't think it has any value. And of course, they won't do it. So they must not believe what they're saying. And the second thing is, if they were to give me the money, I'd walk across the street and buy a hamburger with it. So it's not true that it doesn't have value. People are confusing the money that's in circulation with the debt that is coming down on all of us right now. They're confusing those two. They're calling it fiat money, and it's not fiat money. They're saying that the money has to be backed by gold, and it doesn't and shouldn't. Because the very same people who control the monetary systems of every country in the world today are the people who control gold and silver. And they are playing a little Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit. Please don't throw me into the briar patch. When the people are coming out and saying, we've got to have money backed by gold. That is not what backs money. Money is backed by the ability and the integrity of the issuer to redeem it for valuable goods and services. That's what backs money. And that's what should back money. So the same thing, we can take a look at the community currency. The people who are in that community, whether it be Ithaca, New York, whether it be Salt Spring Island, British Columbia, whether it be Oceanside, British Columbia, whether it be the Calgary dollar, and Calgary dollars are just doing some wonderful things in Calgary. One of the big things that the people who, even in the community currency movement, don't recognize, one of the main features of the community currency is that they are all issued interest-free. I did not say debt-free. A lot of people are saying we've got to have debt-free money. Ladies and gentlemen, money is a debt. That's what it is. In my hands, if I'm the issuer, it has no value whatsoever. Everybody here said you've got to rip it up when it comes back into your own hands, and you're right. But out of my hands and in Stephen's hands, out of my hands, it's a debt to me. In his hands, it's a credit for him. Whenever you issue an IOU, you have to keep track of your IOUs to make sure you have something ready to be able to redeem that IOU upon demand. If you don't, you will lose credibility in the future trades that you will try to make. Calgary dollars are doing exceptionally well. I would say that probably 10% of the people in Calgary are involved. And that's a big city. It's about 800,000, 850,000 people in Calgary. And there's a tremendous percentage of people that are involved in the Calgary dollar. Ithaca hours. Possibly the longest lasting community currency, certainly in North America, started back in 1991 by Paul Glover, is doing tremendous things. Some of the things it's doing, of course, is it's issued as a non-interest bearing debt. It keeps things local. If you're having problems in the local community, it has a tendency to have people trade amongst themselves and bring liveliness back into the community that was formerly possibly going to be going under because of the removal of a major company that built up a town. Community currencies are really an excellent alternative to what we're looking at right now. While we're talking about that, though, here's the Ithaca, New York, and here's some examples. They call it the hour, so that at any one time there's a quarter hour, an eighth hour, etc. No, they're just what you see. They're really just like this. They're not money orders. They are the features that are built into those are not as counterfeit proof as the ones that we showed you from Oceanside and from Salt Spring Island, and the next one to come up, I think it's the next one. Gee whiz, close. Toronto. Toronto also has the Toronto dollars. But no, they're just like this. And you can put them into circulation in a variety of ways. But the money that gets put into circulation, just like the national currency, must be backed. If you don't back it, you're going to run into a difficulty. And you can back it with a promissory note. There's no problem with that. Because a promissory note is just that. It's a promise by the person who is picking up the new currency, it's a promise to repay in a variety of different ways. One of the ways we don't recommend too much is to repay in national currency because we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to have the currency be local and be a community type currency.
What do you think of the euro over in Europe?
What do I think of the euro?
Euro, yeah, but that's a continent-wide currency.
It's a continent-wide currency. Really, there's not much difference between the euro and the American dollar or the Canadian dollar, other than the fact that you've amalgamated a number of countries to accept that currency. But there's no difference in the regard as to how that money is put into circulation. Somebody has to go to the bank and sign a promissory note to get that money into circulation. The euro is the same as the yen, as the peso, as the American dollar, as the Canadian dollar.
How about the Amero?
Well, the Amero is the new currency that is going to be implemented when Mexico, the United States, and Canada merge into the North American Union, or the Society and Prosperity Partnership. How many people are aware that the so-called leaders of our countries have committed us to this treasonous operation? So we've got maybe 25% of the people that know that. You folks really need to get up on this. The three countries that we have, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, are planned to be merged into the North American Union, or the other name for it is the Society and Prosperity Partnership. And as a matter of fact, they are going to be meeting, the three leaders of our countries are going to be meeting in Montebello, Quebec, in Canada, August 18th to the 20th. And do you know that we cannot in Canada even, you brought the question up, now you're getting me excited and emotional, so. We cannot even go there to demonstrate. They have a cordoned off area of 25 miles around Montebello, Quebec, and it's enforced by the US Army. By the US, not even the Canadian Army. It's stunning. They won't let us hold placards. Folks, what are you doing? These people here at Montebello, Quebec on August 18th to the 20th are about to give away the sovereignty and the rights of the citizens of Canada and the United States and Mexico. They won't even allow us to demonstrate. They'll throw you in jail. You show up within 25-mile radius of that and you're done. It's pretty serious. Thank you for bringing up the question. You got me on a higher soapbox. I'm sorry? Well, Montebello, Quebec is a very, very small community. It's well known for one of the most prestigious resorts in North America called the the Seigneurie Club of Montebello, Quebec. And so you've got, I'm sorry, I forget the name of, I just came back from Mexico too. And the leader, of course, there was a huge uprising in Mexico over not having got the right guy in there. But there's going to be Harper, Bush, and the leader of Mexico. And I apologize to any people from Mexico who, those three are going to be there, plus, of course, their coterie of aides and assistants. And they had a meeting in September in Kananaskis, which is not very far from where I am. Again, all the top people were there to hammer out the details. That was September of 2006. Just outside of Banff, Alberta, to hammer out all the details of how they're going to do this merging. So folks, I mean, we're really close to having our own EU in North America. You got to do something about that. We can't do it alone. We got some people in Canada speaking out, the Canada Action Party speaking out about it. But it's all part of a similar problem. We wouldn't have 95% of the problems that we have in the world today if we could revise the monetary system along either one or both of the recommendations that I'm putting forth here. The community currency or the way of revising the national currency. Yes, sir?
The last word I got before I come down here was that they stopped that highway in Texas.
To stop the highway going from Mexico to essentially Winnipeg, Canada, going right through the center.
And there's an armed movement down there to stop it in case they decide they're going to do it in Winnipeg.
Where's the armed movement in in Texas? In Texas?
Because they started eminent domain on property, and they're not putting up with it.
I heard about that, but I did not have it confirmed. If you could keep in touch with me on that, if you have anything that comes up, if you could email me, I'd sure appreciate it. Okay. Just for everybody here, I mean, I'd be happy to give out some business cards, but it's a real simple email address. It's warpo@hotmail.com, and I'll spell it, WARPEAU @hotmail.com. And people say, where'd you get that from? Well, a lot of people know I got a pretty sick sense of humor. It hasn't shown up too much here. And they said, you know, you're really the fifth Marx brother. There's Groucho, Zeppo, Chico, Harpo, and Warpo. So anyway, that's where it comes from. WARPEAU @hotmail.com. Thank you. Yes, sir.
If it's correct, I haven't had a chance to check it out, but there's also an action in Congress to investigate these goings on as of this time.
Who has initiated that action in Congress?
It's the Senate Judiciary.
Oh, is that right? Huh, I hadn't heard that. So far, all that I have heard is negative. In other words, it's coming down fast, really fast. This is supposed to happen by 2010 at the very latest. I mean, folks, that's not a lot of time. It's unbelievable.
I feel that there's a movement on to stop it, but I don't know if it's going to get done.
As I say, I'd appreciate it if you could stay in touch with me on that. Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions on some of the things that we've already gone over here, especially the solution? I put this solution out here because thank you, I'll get right to you. I'm just to say, I put the solution forward, and I've had some people come back to me and say, oh, you're full of crap. And all that. No, well, let's be specific. If you see a problem, I'd like you to not only think about where the problem is, but what you would propose the solution would be to a problem that you perceive. Because what you've seen up there is a framework. But please don't throw out the entire automobile because you don't like the way I've adjusted the mirror. You know, help me adjust the framework. And I'm just one second. I'm just going to go to these two people first, and then I'll come back to you. Sir.
How do we consider world population and population into the parameters that you presented? You take 50 years, the population is going to increase so much, it's killing us now on our taxes. And if we had a rule in place that says, okay, you can have all the kids you want, but any more than 2, you get to pay for their education. And I don't have to pay for it. I'm retired now.
I hear you, but you see, I'm not for taxation. Ever since I was a little kid, I always knew that taxation was theft. Theft, by definition, is taking that which doesn't belong to you without the express permission of and against the wishes of the owner. That's theft. And taxation falls into that definition in every sense. In Canada, we have 167 taxes. 167 different taxes, of which income tax is only one. I imagine you folks would probably be over 100, but I don't know the exact number. But it's pretty bad. And we can do away with all of them. The mathematical model is there. Don't throw the mathematical model out, tweak it. But taxation, you can make your own decisions based upon the fact that you no longer have to pay taxes. And I'm sorry, who was there? I think this gentleman here. Okay, sorry about that.
Just a few weeks ago, the President of the United States reenacted with a presidential decree the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Seizure Act on gold. So now, as we stand right now, all the gold in the United States is actually property of the federal government. All the gold mines are property of the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
How come we don't get to hear more about this, about these presidential orders that are coming out?
That's a very good question. I think it goes back to the quote that I just gave you from John Swinton. The very same people who control the banking system also control 95% of the methods of communication, with the exception of the internet. And they're trying to shut the internet down. They're using a variety of methods to shut the internet down, and it will happen unless we do something about it, I would say, in the next 2 to 3 years. That's my feeling about that. Now, as far as gold is concerned, you guys do know that you were bankrupt in 1933 and that has not been rescinded? Okay? So that goes back to the FDR.
that is, our president has picked up that same law and put it in effect.
Uh-huh. And the next one is right here.
Here. With a lot of different local currencies, what's going to stop counterfeiting?
You know, that was the number, when I first got involved in the community currency movement, that was my #1 question. But you see, the way community currencies are introduced right now, most people are very, very reluctant to take more than a certain percentage. And that's because we all have costs that are associated in the national currency. And it's very difficult for you to repay costs in the national currency if you take 100% in community currency. Now, somebody who's giving guitar lessons, for instance, can take 100% in community currency. Or somebody who is doing massage, or somebody who's doing Reiki, or somebody who is providing nothing but, I don't mean nothing but, somebody who is providing service, just pure service, you can do 100%. But somebody who, say, owns a grocery store, when 60 or 70% of your cost is involved in having put out national currency in the first place, very difficult for you to accept more than about 10% in community currency. So the counterfeiter is going to say, it's not worth my while to start counterfeiting when all that's accepted is, on average, 10, 15%. Now, I want to finish off my answer to you by saying I turned my concern around from the counterfeiting aspect to the aspect of what are the governments going to do when the community currency movement really starts to make incursions. And you know what happened in 1933? There were 3 countries in the world that were saving their people, at least locally, because they had a community currency movement. That was in the depths of the Depression. And Vogel in Austria, and another little town that I've forgotten the name of in Germany, and certain towns in the United States were all using community currencies. The banks went to the government and told them to shut down those community currencies. The governments made it illegal. That's what concerns me. If they can do that, that concerns me 100 times more than counterfeiting. And the next one is, please.
Yes, you're saying that banks can't lend out liabilities. How about credit unions? Aren't they're privately owned, and don't they borrow from the lenders and so on?
The credit unions in Canada and the United States, I believe, are similar in that they borrow from the lender of last resort. In Canada, it's the Bank of Canada. In the United States, it's the Federal Reserve. They can borrow from intermediaries between them, such as the SLCs and the commercial banks here in the United States and the chartered banks in Canada. But essentially, nobody can lend a liability. It's just not legal. And of course, it doesn't make economic or accounting sense. You can't lend out a liability. And of course, to a bank, a loan is an asset and a deposit's a liability. To us, a loan is a liability and a deposit an asset. It's just the opposite, because that's the way it is in a double entry bookkeeping system.
Oh, push the thumb. The mute to on button. Yeah.
Don't you draw the distinction between theoretical solutions and practical solutions? Because as a practical matter, when a push comes to shove and something goes wrong, and the paper currency, even though backed by all these things, becomes worthless, or the infrastructure of transportation breaks down, that there is no delivery of power or milk or anything to my home, am I not better off and safer by just holding some food storage, water, fuel, power?
That's actually a double question in there. You've raised some excellent points. You have to understand that the reason a paper currency could collapse is not because it's a paper currency, but because of the interest-bearing aspect of its very creation. That's why the whole system, that's why the United States currency is going to collapse. Sorry, the Federal Reserve currency is going to collapse. And that's why the Canadian currency is going to, you know, on a per capita basis, we are a bigger debtor nation than you people are. Yes, you got $42 trillion in debt and a $9 trillion money supply. We got $6 trillion and an $800 billion money supply. We're 1/10 the size of you with 1/7 of the debt. So we have a higher per capita problem. But again, the problem is not the fact that it's a paper currency, because I back this individually. All of us in the United States back, all of you folks in the United States back this with your ability and integrity to provide goods and services to redeem this upon demand. And we in Canada...
Can I have houses on Boardwalk and Park?
We in Canada back this with our goods and services when we are asked to redeem it upon demand. So your question is very well placed. The reason that you have to start doing the very things that you said in the latter part of your question is because you are very perspicacious. You're very observant to be able to say, something's coming down. I got to do something here. I can't rely on the currency. You can't rely on the currency, but not because it's paper. With all due respect to some very wonderful people in your country and my country who are gold bugs, and I used to be a gold bug until I understood what money really is. Money is an IOU. It is a contract. It is backed by the ability and the integrity of the issuer to redeem it upon demand. All you are doing by putting gold behind this is you are having one IOU backed by another IOU, because I don't know of anybody who wants to just buy gold for the sake of it being an IOU or for the sake of it being a commodity. Very few people want gold as a commodity. Let's face it, gold as a commodity has less intrinsic value than almost anything else you can name in history. Iron ore has 100,000 uses and has very little monetary value. Gold has 3 uses, and one of them it shouldn't be used for. Right now it's used as a form of money, if you will. Then there's in the electronics industry, and then for fillings in dental. And I don't think it should be used in there at all, but that's another subject. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
Back the national debt with natural resources that are in the ground, like gold that hasn't been mined and platinum that hasn't been mined and so forth. Is that true?
Well, that's a very good point. Again, what backs any currency is the ability of the people to back it with available goods and services. I mean, would you accept a note from me that said, oh, I should be able to pay you in 10 years when we mine it out of the ground? You know, so of course not. When people say, well, Canada is worth $3,000 trillion. Yeah, with all the resources we have, and by the way, I got to throw this in, we're bigger than you guys. You must have hated when Alaska joined the Union. Anyway, it's all well and good to say $3,000 trillion is what it's worth, but that's in situ. That's the forests, the mines, the lakes, the ability of the people to get together and produce those things and get them out into society. But it's ludicrous to say that that's the worth if you never get the opportunity to put it into practice. Just one more thing about, I've got 9 points on gold. I'm not going to go into them now because I know I've only got a couple of minutes. But think of it this way. You got to think of another thing. Over 50% of the countries in the world don't have gold. They don't have access to it. How does it make sense that you and I can't trade shoes and potatoes because we didn't go to a country over there to get some gold so that we could back our trading notes? It doesn't make sense. And the biggest thing that did it for me was that the very same people who control this iniquitous monetary system are the very same people that control gold and silver. And if you don't think that the same people control it, look what they did to the Hunts when the Hunts tried to do things in the 70s to change the way the system was. And they decimated the Hunts in the 70s.
I had a question.
I thought it was on.
stocks and...
I'm sorry?
How about the stock exchange and utilities and all that?
What would you like me to say about the stock exchange and the utilities? What is your question?
About the stock exchange.
Well, I know I'm gonna tick off some people here for sure on this, but the stock exchange is not a reflection of reality whatsoever. And the fact that it is so inflated above and beyond reality should be a huge warning signal to a lot of people. Well over 14,000, the Dow. We got the same thing in Canada. What's happening with the huge bubble in the real estate in the United States is going to come crashing into Canada with the same thing. This is along the lines of what you're talking about. I'm sorry? Commodities. Yes, yeah, they're all tied in. They're all tied in. I've got to add one more thing in here. Right now, the average price of a home in Vancouver is $750,000. That's average. And where I am, and I heard somebody say it earlier today, I don't know who it was, but they were talking about the second largest producer of oil. And do you know where the over 50% of the oil reserves, the known world oil reserves are? The province I come from. 54% of all the world's known reserves are in Alberta. There's 30 trillion barrels of oil in the tar sands. And we have several companies up there producing millions of barrels a day. We're not even scratching the surface. I got to throw something in here too. If you think they're over there in Iraq for oil, I got some great land for you, oceanside property in Edmonton. So that's not why they're there. But that's another story. There was another question. Oh, the commodities. What aspect of the commodities would you like me to address?
How is this going to affect commodities?
Let me put your question in a different way. When I have given seminars in the past, I've had people come up to me to say, you sound pretty down about the financial system, and I believe a lot of what you're saying, but what should I invest in? You know, where should I be putting my money if it's all as gloom and doom as what you're saying? And I'm not a Bible thumper, but there's a saying in the Bible that comes out, and it's something that really rang home for me, and it says, where a man's treasure is, that's where his heart is. And so we are caught up, and I was, and I would say I am much less so now, we as a people were caught up in amassing material wealth and amassing money in our bank accounts for the sake of just doing that. And in the countries that I've traveled to around the world, I've been to about 40 countries now around the world, and I see the situation. I don't understand what we're doing. It's crazy. We're stocking up things in the wrong place. And if you decide that you need to put your money somewhere, we should be helping each other. I know that's probably not going to satisfy what you're hoping me to say, but if you think you're going to put it into real estate or gold or silver certificates, none of these. They're all ephemeral. They're all transient. And if you don't believe me, wait another year, because things are really starting to go down in the avalanche. I don't have any recommendation when you're talking about the market or commodities. There is no such thing as a safe haven. And with the exception of what I said.
In God we trust. All those cash check or charge.
You got it. Any other questions?
First of all, you're a very great speaker and presenter like Alex Trebek. But my
like
question,
Alex Trebek?
Yes.
Thank you. He was a Canadian too.
I know.
Yeah.
And he looks a little bit like you too. You could, be an impersonator of him. Or he could be an impersonator of you. But my question is, why is Australia so prosperous?
Australia is a smaller country than Canada, and it is prosperous, but it's held back by the same kind of constraints that we are. They're just on a lesser basis. on what basis were you thinking of when you asked the question? What criteria were you pointing to that made you think that they were, say, on a per capita basis, more prosperous than either the US or Canada?
I was there 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I could not find any poor people. The starting salaries in Perth for even the lowest worker are over $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now these are starting salaries
Yes.
for manual labor.
Yeah, that's the same in Alberta.
Yeah.
In Alberta right now, we are 300,000 people short of what we need. 300,000. That is from ditch digger to CEO. We need 300,000 people. We can't get them. We have beautiful restaurants in Edmonton that are having to close down because they can't get people. And these are wonderful restaurants, and other ones that are putting signs up on their windows saying, we got to take Tuesday and Wednesday off. We can't find enough staff. And so who's benefiting? You know, these people are further, and what happened? The landlords have raised the rents from $500 a month to $1,800 in one fell swoop. So who's prospering? When you see this system, all of this money in excess money is mostly going to the banks, because as you make more and more money, you pay a higher percentage in taxation. So I can't comment on the relative prosperity between Australia and Canada and the United States, but if they are more prosperous, if what you're saying is true, their time will come. And I really could answer this by saying, and that's, okay, can I one more thing? Okay, and that's it. I was in Argentina. I was asked to speak at universities in Argentina in 2004. So I spoke at several universities in Buenos Aires, and they tied their dollar back in the late 90s to the early 2000s. They tied their peso to the US dollar, 1-to-1. Then in the early 2000s, I don't know if you folks remember the horrible things that took place in Buenos Aires and the rest of Argentina. There were riots in the streets because the banks told the depositors, we won't let you have more than 50 Argentine pesos a day. We won't let you have it. That's it. My money, but I can't get it. And of course, when they devalued the currency from 1-to-1 to 3-to-1, it happened overnight. Imagine right now, you go and you're paying, silly example, but $4 for a hamburger, and tomorrow you're paying 12. A car cost you $20,000. Tomorrow it cost you $60,000. That's what happened in Argentina. And they rightfully rioted because they saw the banks as being behind what was happening. And when I was talking to the universities, I said, I know what your problem is and I know how to solve it. And I told them the solution. They said, we can't, this has to be off the record. I support what you're saying, but I couldn't possibly put it into practice because our funding for this university would be pulled. And that was the private university. I didn't get the same thing from the public university, which was the University of Buenos Aires. And by the way, one of the university professors there of economics was one of the leading lights that saved the country by putting the credito into circulation in Argentina. There would have been millions of people starving in the streets. And Argentina is not a third world country. It is second world, first world, however you want to look at it. Very prosperous, almost a European type of country. And the people were thrown into the streets because of the monetary system, because they didn't print enough tickets. That's what this monetary system is. It's tickets. And we didn't print enough. So in Alberta, we gotta close down hospitals and lay off doctors and nurses because we didn't print enough tickets. It's insanity. What is physically desirable and possible must be made financially available. Otherwise, we are letting the system control us instead of we, the people, controlling the system. Thank you very much.
But when the dollar was devalued, a potato was still worth a potato, and a chicken was still worth a chicken.
Thank you, John.
Vern Warwick, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much, all of you.